All right, buddy. We are
I
live.
saw, I saw that we are live. There's no countdown today, Jimmy. It's April. We're going right into it. There's no countdown for people to get ready. We're just going right at it. There's no question about it. Right now, if you're not ready, you got a problem at this point because we're in, man. We are in and we're excited. Thank you so much for joining us this week. We are really excited to talk to you about things that we can do in leadership to not only enhance the people around us, but our capacity as well. Because we all know that we always talk about leadership, because it's leadership always, and it's always about leadership. We can't wait to talk to you this week. We are both coming off of multiple days of working with other people and connecting and talking about some really great things going on. But that takes a lot out of you. People, that takes a lot out of you. And Jimmy looks like he just woke up. And I'm just trying to figure out how to get through the first 5 minutes here because this guy's still asleep. Does it mean I got to talk a little louder, Jimmy? Because I can talk a little louder. You know I can talk a little louder, Jimmy. Clearly not.
Goodness.
That's the way that it works, man. Yeah, how you doing, boss? You doing good,
buddy? Yes. Right. Of course, I'm in Chicago, buddy. You know that I was hanging out with you for a little bit, so it was good to see you.
Yeah, we got a chance to see each other on Thursday night, and talk about just a great time, absolutely great time, just talking about leadership and having a good conversation and that kind of thing. And you got a chance to hang out with our DA Leadership Institute, our Aspiring Administrators Academy, our Aspiring Superintendents Academy, spending some time with our cohort. We have our spring cohort that started, and we have about 25 leaders in that group. They all came to Chicago to hang out and talk about leadership. And it was the first set of 3 sessions that we did with them, and talking about not only leadership in general, but the superintendency, how to get into the superintendency, the interview process, the search firm process, the resume, the cover letter, the board governance, everything that goes along with superintendents. We had a great chance to talk about that. So it was super fun. Had a great time. Great conversation with you. And was just really thankful that you were willing to come and take the time to speak with them. You had a lot of stuff going on this weekend too, besides Iowa. My goodness, Jimmy, Iowa, please, international title this afternoon. I can't wait. Yeah,
that's right.
Very cool. So what did you have going on this week?
So you ready for this, Joe?
Yeah.
I got to hang out with Dr. Jeff Zoll.
I don't even know who that is.
That's right. Lots of doctors this weekend I got to hang out with. Do you know any of you, Joe? Do you know any, Joe? Do you?
I know a couple.
I see Chuck Moss and Frank Pullen are here this morning. Imagine that. Thank you, Frank. Yes, super jacked. 2:30. We are 6.5 hours away from tip-off. I cannot wait. We'll see what happens. So it'll be a lot of fun. But you know what? To take down the number 1 team, that was pretty fun.
It was a great game. It was a super fun game. It was just a fun game to watch, on both sides. And I thought the reaction on both sides was equally as respectful, and I just thought it was really good. It's a really great show of leadership.
Well, I'm actually still in Chicago. Had a great chance to hang with my team here the last couple of days, Joe, and it's just a reminder again, right, how we can come together, current leaders who are still practicing in the field and be able to gather with, school leaders across the country and just fill each other's cup, right? Continue to get better, try to figure out how we can best support this profession, a profession that, we love so desperately, because we still believe that regardless of your role in schools today, when it comes to leadership, everyone is a leader and everyone has that capacity to lead. And the question is, how are we encouraging, supporting, inviting, and quite frankly, inspiring people to want to continue to lead? We know the job is challenging. We know there are lots of struggles for various reasons. But one of the things we spent a lot of time yesterday, Joe, talking about was, how do we help our leaders currently who are struggling get past the overwhelming feeling of what everyone is facing, right? And what's interesting to me is that there are many leaders currently right now who are navigating, very complex situations and quite frankly, doing it effectively, doing it at a high level. And yet others continue to struggle. And what part is that? Is it a skills issue? Is it a mindset issue that, they just can't get past that feeling? they just kind of get stuck in that feeling a little bit. And sometimes we surround ourselves with others who also have that same feeling. Sometimes it does come down to the capacity, right? It's not that they don't have the skills. It's not that they don't have the right mindset. It's just that they're alone, right? They're isolated. They don't have enough help. Because at the end of the day, the truth of the matter is some people really are trying to do as much as they can on their own. And I think that begins to lend itself to a lot of different issues.
Yeah.
And so anyway,
we were
able to come together yesterday and work through that. And I love how our team continues to, just the camaraderie amongst them. And I think that's probably the biggest thing they would say is that they don't feel alone because they have these people that they've connected with. And so when they're in the field, they have someone to reach out to, they can connect, someone they can be a confidant for them, someone who can just bounce ideas off, whatever happens to be the case. But we had a great time yesterday learning from one another, doing some presentations, watching people, their gifts and giving them feedback. That's the other thing, right? How vulnerable they can be amongst other people. And part of that is because of the relationship, right? When you feel connected and you feel loved and supported, you're willing to put yourself out there. And whether you're vulnerable or not, you know that people, have your best intentions at heart and truly do want you to continue to grow and develop as a leader. And that's just what I love about our team. So so we had a great time. Some good food this weekend. Way too much food, dude. That's the downside of Chicago. I don't think I've ever had a bad meal in Chicago. So pretty awesome. So.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I had a great time too. And obviously the food was fantastic. But here's the thing that I'm thinking about as you're talking. And for everybody who's with us today, Chuck and Frank and Lynn, anybody else that jumps on, if you have a problem with practice or you want to talk about something in particular today, we're kind of a blank slate today. But we were thinking about what we were going to have this conversation about. It was really interesting to me because we were both coaching this weekend. We were both coaching groups that are then going out to lead in places. And I got asked a question that it was really interesting to me as it came up, and I didn't really know how to answer it because I think it made me kind of rethink some of the things that I'm doing and what I want to do moving forward as I move out of this superintendency into more of the connection with other groups across the country and that kind of thing. But the thing that I was asked is like, where do you get your coaching? And I didn't think about it. When I thought about it, I thought, well, I read a lot of books. I connect with you. I do I listen to a lot of podcasts. I take a look at a lot of stuff online. I connect with people across the country. I'm doing all of this stuff, but it was kind of a pointed question. Like, you're here telling us how to do things better. Who's helping you get better? Right. And I thought that is such a great point, because if I'm going to be out here helping people get better in their particular roles, who am I to say that I know everything in these spaces? And honestly, if I don't have anything formally in place to get myself to, lean in and get better, sometimes I just kind of, we just keep going and going and going and doing and doing and doing. I think about we've gone through 2 master's programs and 1 PhD program. And in the difference between leading when I was going through those programs and leading now is that when I was going through the programs, I always had anchor things to go back to connect on, to talk about like the theory, like the practice, the philosophy, whatever the case may be. But I was meeting with people on a regular basis, growing as I met with them on a regular basis. I had a teacher for each class, right? We had an advisor for the whole group. And I think about, as we get out of those programs, we can feel however we want to about the programs, whether or not they were effective or not effective. But at the same time, we were in a program with a group of people growing together and moving forward with a focus, right? With a focus on how to get better as a leader and get to an end goal in terms of what that looked like. And I think we often in these spots, when we get into the spot as a superintendent or the leader in the building, we're so overwhelmed with the stuff that's going on that we don't reach out and get better ourselves. But then B, as we get into the jobs that we are now in, Jimmy, when we're helping people get better in their spots, what are we doing to put an emphasis on growing ourselves at the same time, and not just reading an article or taking a look at some tweets or just having a conversation? Do we have anything formally in place, a mentor, a coach, somebody to help us get better along the way? Not only to get better in terms of how we lead others, but get better in terms of what we do logistically with slide design when we get into groups of people, with coaching frameworks, with all of the stuff that we try to help other people at. How are we making sure that we're not at a spot where we're the only ones looking at this particular work to get other people better? I don't know if you've thought about it that way.
Yeah, I do. And it's funny because you said who is helping us get better, right?
Yeah.
And I also kind of see it, Joe, as who are we allowing to help us get better?
Absolutely.
Right? Who are those individuals that we're allowing them to help us, right? And part of it is, so, it's a great question. And so a couple things I would say about that is, for me personally right now, the fact that I'm able to sit here on a weekly basis with you and have these conversations and then watch the comments that people are sharing. I mean, I feel like every time we do the weekly show, somebody who's watching shares something in the chat box that gets me to think and gets me to reflect, which then in turn helps me get better if I'm willing to do that, right? And that's the reason we talk about the power of reflection, why it is so important that we reflect, because without reflection, there really is no growth. So for many of us still today, especially for me, who's no longer a current practitioner, but one of the benefits I do have, I always say this, like, wouldn't it be great if we could all go back and hit the reset button, to go back and do it all over again, take all the wisdom, the learnings, the knowledge, the mistakes, the experiences that we've had, and go do it again. But if every time we do that, right, when you think about people who leave a job and go to a different job or go to a different job, whether it's 3 years later or 5 years later, it is an opportunity to hit the reset button, to walk into a new environment and, quite frankly, hopefully do it better, because internally we want to be better for people. And so there's got to be that driving motivation, that the reason we keep learning is because we want to make a greater impact. And again, I believe that's why most people went into the profession. And just because we go into a certain level of leadership, many people do it because they are trying to broaden that spectrum, right? To make even a greater impact by the impact and influence that we have on others. I know for me personally, the fact that I'm able to go out in so many different schools just to watch people, to learn from so many different leaders, because they all have a different way of doing things, right? And, I've always believed there's no right way or wrong way. There's just different ways to lead. I'm never going to be Joe Sanfilippo. I'm never going to be, whether it's Josh Tovar or Sue, who's on here this morning, or Chuck. I'm not going to be those individuals. But what I can do is I can watch, I can observe, I can listen, I can ask, and then I can reflect on that information or that wisdom. And then I can begin to try to emulate it in my style, right? And so I think there's some intentionality behind that. And I do think, there's no reason, Joe, in 2023, and again, I don't say this to be critical, but God, I just find it really hard that people would be isolated in 2023. There are so many ways to connect with people if you want to connect with people. And so it just has to take that intentionality to say, yep, I want to connect. I want to continue to learn. And I believe, especially people that I know anyway, I mean, the people that I follow on social media, there isn't a single individual, whether I even really know them that well or not, but I believe that if I reached out to them on a direct message and said, hey, I need your help, I believe, in my experience to this point, since 2011, when I really began to become connected, I've never had anybody say no to me to help me. And I like to think I try to do the same for other people. So there's just something about this circle of people that, if you want to be connected and need that support, as long as you're willing to allow other people to help you, I think the help is there.
Okay, so I'm going to push back a little bit on that, because I think that I understand where you're coming from, and I agree with you. But two things that you said there got me to thinking about the other side of the coin. And the first one is, who are you letting into your circle? Who are you vulnerable enough? Who are you willing? Like, I know when I talk to you, you don't nod your head and say good job. You asked me questions about how did it go? What did you look into? Did you lean into a framework? Did you lean into stories? Did you lean into this? Did you, did you make your connections with this group or that group? Like, you'll ask me the tough questions that make me think about and reflect hard on what we do. But we're in a completely different situation. We've known each other for almost 10 years. I mean, like, that's a whole different conversation, right? So who are you letting into your circle in terms of what that looks like? So that's the part that I agree with you. The part that I'm pushing back on is this. When we talk about how it's difficult to be, how we find it difficult to be isolated in 2023, we feel that way because we've been connected for so long, right? Like it just like when you lead for a long time and things become easier, or things become, you feel like you get a groove moving forward, it's because of the experience going on. If you've never done it before, if you've never been part of a national conversation, if you've never reached out beyond your circle because you've been, overwhelmed or whatever the case may be, they may not know what that feels like. And let's be really honest, when you reach out to someone, like, you come with, you may not feel it, but I think I feel it. And I think a lot of people, it's Jimmy Casas reaching out. This is Jimmy Casas reaching out, right? Like, that comes with a little moxie. And so if you're just starting out and you don't have a large group of people that you're connected to, and your Twitter, you're following 10 people on Twitter, and you're connected to 7, like, and you're saying we're trying to figure out a way for them to reach out. I think it's much more difficult for them to reach out, and they can feel isolated. So I think it's incumbent upon us who have been out for a while, that when people ask, just like you said, when people ask and they reach out and they ask you questions about how to get better, it is absolutely incumbent upon us that have been doing it for a while to say, absolutely, we're going to help out. Absolutely. And we're going to connect you to a couple more people. And I think it's just like anything else, Jimmy. It's like when you first start and you do feel isolated because you haven't been involved in it at all. I think trying to get connected and feel the value of the network can be a little difficult.
I don't disagree with you, but I also say this. But in 2011, Joe, I started like everybody else.
Yeah.
And I still reached out to people. And people still didn't say no to me. Right. Mm-hmm. And so nobody was reaching out to me, that's for sure. Right? Yeah. Nobody was reaching out to me. So I get what you're saying. But here's my worry about that. At the end of the day, I still go back to this. What are we going to do about that?
Yeah, right.
If I am isolated, then what am I going to do about that? I mean, Joe, when we walk into a building today, if you were having a coaching conversation and you walked into a building and a principal said, hey, Joe, I'm just really struggling because I feel alone. I feel isolated. I don't feel like I have anybody to help me. I don't have any support here. You wouldn't say, well, that's just because you started off and that's just the way it's going to be for a while. Right. Mm-hmm. You would say what? Well, let's talk.
Let's talk. And then let's get you connected to a couple more people.
Yeah, you might say that. And then you might help them get connected, but you might also start asking them, so who in this district are you connected with? Is there anybody you have a relationship? Is there anybody you can reach out to? I mean, I know, again, and that's why I kind of see it both ways, right? So I don't disagree with any of it, but I think part of it is that's why that reflection is so powerful.
Yeah.
I mean, I learned from it, right? In my first principalship, I can see it. I did feel like I could just try to do it by myself. I really wasn't intentionally reaching out to people. But because other people were supporting me at some point, right? And whether it was still through class or the Ed Leadership Program or whatever it was, then I began to understand it as I learned from other people. So as I take my second role, I do it much different. Then I arrive and I begin to reach out to people. I go to the elementary school as a high school principal to meet the elementary principals. Right. I go to the middle school to make those connections. So because right now, Joe, there are so many leaders that are feeling this feeling of being overwhelmed and exhausted. But and here's the other thing. Sometimes they feel that way because they feel the pressure coming from others. Right. And I think what can happen is we can slowly it's almost like we're given therapy a little bit, right? Because the coaching aspect, if you look at it, is, it's like teaching. We're coaching the whole person. And so, yes, there is a little bit of that, allowing them to vent maybe, or allowing them to complain, or allowing them to kind of almost feel sorry for themselves, or allow them to say, I don't know, question whether they can do the work. I do think there's a place for that, because if they feel safe enough to share that with me or any one of us, then that's powerful too, because there's that connection. But at some point we have to say, but what can you do within your sphere of influence that begin to get you out of this? Because with all the coaching in the world, we're not magicians. I can't get them out of it. They have to at some point make the decision, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Yeah,
and now
that's
I'm
true.
ready, right? So that I do think there is that balance, right? But you know what, Joe? You know what this is all going to come back to? You already know the answer to this. It's going to come back to those connections every time. And that's what I get out of it more than anything is making those connections with individuals. And it kind of goes both ways. I mean, you could say the same thing about being a father, or the same thing about being a husband, right?
Yeah, right.
What are you going to do about it?
So let's go back that, because I think we're coming. I think the question that I asked was to get exactly what you just said out, because I think we see it from both sides. So the question becomes for us then, not only how do we help, but how do we help people that are afraid to get connected because they're afraid of the response from other people? So do we say to them, do we have that conversation when they feel like, when you come into it doesn't matter if you're coming in as a new teacher, or you're coming in as a new instructional coach, or you're coming in as a new principal or a new superintendent, there's the one thing that is the same in all of those is you're new. Like, it doesn't even matter if you're in the building before, you're new. That's what it is.
Dad. You're a new mom,
or new dad, or new your new husband. It's all of it. It's new. So that piece of it, that piece comes back to, how do we put ourselves in a situation where when you're new, how can we help people reach out a little bit and feel comfortable? Because if you're new into a district, getting connected to people is important, but we also want to make sure that you're connected to the right people. Let's be honest about that, right? Because you want to be with people that are going to build you up as opposed to knock you down, especially when you're new in the space. So what does that look like? Because I think a lot of times people are afraid to jump out. Carol was talking about afraid of response or judgment. Yeah, absolutely. If someone's afraid that they're going to be judged in their first month of how good they're going to be overall, they're not going to say anything. So if you're coming in as a new person, Jimmy, wherever that is, let's say you're coming in as a new principal into a new school district and you want to make connections. It's great for us to say you need to make connections. It's like somebody telling me that you need to exercise. That's great. And I know it's true, but get me started. What am I going to do to get me started? So what advice do you have? And I've got a couple things, but what advice do you have when you come new into a space to not say it's important to make connections? Here's how you make connections. Go ahead.
Yeah, the first thing I'd say is I don't see it as an either or. I think it's a both, right? In other words, I think there's a responsibility on those people that are bringing in the people to support them, and to provide, here are some resources, here are some things to consider. By the way, we've already established some connections that help you get started. These people are great and unbelievable. They'll be there to support you, to guide you, to mentor you, those types of things. At the same time, Joe, let's say you're the new principal. Hey, so one of the things we want you thinking about, Joe, is what are some things that you've done in the past? What's the supports that you think you might need? Give us a little bit of direction on some of the things that you feel you need as you come in. So we would like to be able to partner with you in that and support you in that realm, right? Whatever that happens to be the case. So I think I see it as kind of a both on both sides of that. But that's kind of where, Joe, where it comes in, right? The whole idea of, it's kind of like, if you're coming on board and I provide a mentor for you, right? Let's just say, or we provide someone to support you. It's always kind of the same, or the instructional coach. Let's say, hey, we have someone here to support you with instruction and so forth. But it's kind of like we say, and I think that's what you're saying, but who's supporting the mentors? Who's supporting the instructional coaches? If the instructional coaches are always in the classroom, but nobody's ever coaching them or supporting them, how do they get better, right? I think that's what you're saying. And so you're exactly right in those trainings and those support systems and what they have in place. So, but I'm curious to see what you're going to say. And then let me reflect on your comments, and then I'll kind of maybe jump back in.
Okay, so I can. Well, of course, again, you steal my thunder because that's exactly what I was going to say. I think it kind of goes both ways in terms of the organization has an obligation to make sure that you have a process in place to be connected to people. Okay, but at the same time, you have to figure out ways that you can connect with people, in that area to grow yourself in this. So the way that I think about it is, if somebody comes into our organization, they're going to get a formal mentor, right? Like they're going to have somebody along with them, and we have that person with them for 2 years, and we have somebody that tells them, where the bathrooms are and where how to get paid. All right, you got that piece of it, right? But then there's the informal mentors that take place that often, if we don't figure out a way to kind of lean towards people or make sure that they're connected to people, if that informal mentor goes in a different direction, the result is completely different, right? Because we want good people connected to good people. We want, that kind of stuff is important for us to move the entire organization forward. And if we can't intentionally help them get there, then we leave it to chance. And when you leave stuff to chance, you end up putting yourself in a situation where you don't know what you're going to get at the end of the day. So my first thing would be, as you come into the organization that brings you in has an obligation to make sure that you're connected formally, and anybody who supervises you in that organization is definitely has an obligation to check on you throughout the course of the time to make sure that you are still connected to those people. You don't have to be the person. You have to just make sure that they're connected to those people. Having said that, I'm also in charge. If I'm the organization that's bringing you in, I want to make sure that you're connected to the right people informally as well, right? Like, can I get you into a different classroom? Can I get you into a different school to take to connect with another, one of the other principals that's doing really incredible things? And not just like, well, hey, this is a great principal, so you should go talk to this person. No, you say to that person, hey, this person is fantastic at running staff meetings. Can we figure out a time where we can both go over and watch their staff meeting? And then after we watch their staff meeting, we're going to connect and talk about what that looked like. Then we're going to go into that person's office and have a conversation about how they planned that staff meeting and what it looked like and what they were trying to get out of it, right? So now we've kind of, I think it's got to be specific. This person is phenomenal at holding parent-teacher conferences. Like this, they are events. They are something that's incredible. Let's make sure that we're both in that space during that time so we can see some of the things that go on during that time. I mean, we've got to it's not just connect them to a great principal, connect them to a great teacher, connect them to a great instructional coach, connect them to a great, curriculum director. It's about, what does that person do that's so exceptional that we can help them in that particular area? Because that does two things. The first thing that it does is it focuses the concentration on an area that we know that they're going to get improvement on, or they're going to get better on, or they're going to see some success in. But the second thing that it does is it doesn't overwhelm them, and it doesn't say to them, as the new person in the organization, we want you to be just like them, because that's not what we want. I don't want my high school principal to be just like my middle school principal. I want my high school principal to go take a look at what my middle school principal is in the area of X and just make sure that they're great in the area of X. But I also want my middle school principal to make sure that they connect with my elementary principal and in the area of Y, and make sure that those two are connected so that person can get better in the area of Y. I'm not looking them to get umbrella better, as I don't want to turn them. We're not trying to create clones out of people. We just want them to get better in certain areas, or make sure that they're supported in certain areas, and then they can grow, incrementally across the way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And Joe, when you said, we're gonna get them supported and have people, like, if you hire me today and you begin to share these things with me, then the other side of it is, I would also have a responsibility to say, Joe, so if I needed this, who would I turn to for that, right? So I would also ask some questions, right? But the key is, I think, is that it's almost like you invited me in to feel safe to ask the question, because you started sharing the support systems that would be available for me. So I see it as a leader of an organization. As you bring people into your organization, let's be very open and be able to communicate effectively the resources and the supports that are available to the people that we're bringing into our organizations. I thought where you're going to go, Joe, is the secretary. I'm going to take you, introduce you. Here's the secretary who's going to really be able to answer a lot of these questions that you're going to have. Like you said, how to fill out a leave form, where to park the car, all these things that we don't really take care of during the onboarding process sometimes. Or let's be honest, there's so many things that are on onboarding, and I don't remember half the things they shared with me this morning. I just need to know who to go to when I have that question. But it's the intentionality, it's the time you're providing them. I heard you say, if I heard you correctly, you're right. It's almost like initially, hey, I'm going to partner with you. I'm going to take you over there. You and I are going to sit down.
Correct.
Because you care so much that you recognize that it is about relationships. It is about connecting. It is about making them feel supported. And I'm going to model for them, because what I'm hoping is I create an experience that they're going to replicate that when they have a student who struggles and doesn't know where to go. Right. And it's almost like the pay it forward type thing. So, those things in terms of who you have in place, absolutely, and making those connections. But again, it kind of goes back to that onboarding conversation we were having before. But one of the things I would say is, remember, with new people, we have to be really intentional on how we're going to invest in our new people. But part of it is not to forget to reinvest in our veteran people. And our veteran staff can play a huge role in that partnership and that resource and that support and that guidance for our new staff coming in. And what I really like about that is it builds a connection. So there isn't this resentment sometimes between the new people coming in and the people that have been there for a while. And I think we have to be a little careful about that, because I do think sometimes that we really want to take care of our new people. We kind of sometimes do things that we haven't even done for the veteran staff that has currently been there for so long. And so we have to be a little careful about that and just be very cognizant of that as well. But I think the more things that we can do intentionally in bringing people back together, but hopefully for this crew today, it's just a reminder again, right? That is why leadership is so hard. There are so many things to think about, but at the end of the day, at least I can say it for this crew here that shows up in the mornings with us, is I do believe that people here truly want to support the people coming in because they care about our profession and they recognize for our profession to stay strong and vibrant, then we need to continue to carry the banner for our profession and for those who are entering it, and make sure that we set them up for success. If we're going to continue to be what I believe is still the greatest profession there is.
Yeah, that's when you're talking, I think a couple of things hit me. The first is that I absolutely believe that about our veteran staff. I think sometimes we just think that they're doing great, so we're going to keep them doing great. And part of our passion project process that allows people to grow on their own and pick something that they want. I hope when we have this street fair at the end of the year where our staff really just has conversations about what they learned throughout the course of the year. Part of it is about the content. Okay. Part of it is about the project. But honestly, I'm going to be really honest about this. 80% of it is to make sure that they can stay connected and continue to be engaged and connect with each other in a way that they haven't in the past. It really is. It's just about having conversations with each other and creating value for not only people that just come into the organization, but for people who have been here for 15 years, because now we're on the same level. Now we're all talking about how we got better. And when a veteran teacher can have a conversation with a new teacher about how they got better throughout the course of the year, it helps that new teacher understand that this is just something that we do. So that's the positive part of it, all right? The negative part is hitting in my head as well, because I think about all the stuff that we do to invest on a daily basis in people that just get here versus people who have been here for 15 years. And when we talk about how you want to go back to when you started because there's so many things that you would have done differently, I think about that. But I also think, man, I wouldn't mind going back 3 years ago. And Sammy, I've been doing this thing for 12 years. I wouldn't mind going back 3 years ago because it could have made a difference then. I think, and at the same time, we can't apologize for that. When you just we have to be in a situation where we can, now we learn something, we can make a connection and move forward and understand that if we go back to the beginning, we talked about how are we getting better. Just this kind of conversation is helpful. But at the same time, what can we make sure that we do to take action moving forward? It's the whole piece about the reflection is important. I agree with you. I agree with you that we don't learn unless we reflect. Having said that, I also think we learn by reflecting. We learn more by doing differently based on what we reflected on, right?
Absolutely.
So how are we taking action on the reflection? Because it makes us better along the way. I mean, and the comments coming this week are fantastic. Lynn's got a program called P2P, peer-to-peer networking. Teachers can observe peers in area that they want to get better in. What a great opportunity. Carol Sue, talking about the secretary being the real boss. Absolutely. Lynn, absolutely. They're the people that run the whole place, man. I'm telling you. So I think the comments from the people involved today are really good, and they're really pointed on how we can get better individually. So thank you so much for being part of that conversation today. Jimmy, I'm going to let you take us out on this in terms of how we can make sure that we get better along the way. But man, this conversation went in a direction that I didn't know it was going to go in. And this is kind of what we do. And all of a sudden, here we are sitting and talking about, but it comes back to the relationships. I really want us to concentrate, Jimmy. Please understand. I want us to concentrate as we move forward, just not on that concept of it's important to build relationships, but getting into the why and the how of what that looks like. Because again, when people tell me that I need to exercise, I say, yes, I need to exercise. But that's not helping me do a push-up today, okay? So how can we figure out a better way to make sure that people can get invested in that process moving forward? Go.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking at Lynn's comment, and Lynn, I'm so grateful that you shared that. And we all know this, that the only way that P2P network is going to work is if you make those connections for people to trust one another. Because we hear again, we know this is a great practice, but yet there are so few schools that actually do that, right? They're still not willing to do that because they don't feel comfortable other people coming into their classrooms. And so it's a great reminder again, why that's so powerful in those connections. Joe, you started off the question with who is helping someone ask you, who is coaching you? Who is coaching you, right? And then we talked about who are we allowing to coach us. And it reminded me, and I just want to close the story. It reminded me of a young administrator who was in the Cardinal Stritch program, same program you went through, right? Isn't that crazy, right? That connection without even knowing when we met that we were both the Cardinal Stritch grads, is that connection. And my supervisor at the time, or my cooperating supervisor, Nancy Blair, when I had reached out to her and said, who is someone that could help me be a great principal? Who would you recommend? And she gave me 3 names on a piece of paper and said, call this one individual first, but they're not in this district, right? And this was MPS at the time. And so she gave me 1 outside of MPS and 2 inside of MPS. And the first name she put on the list was Rick DeFore. And she reached out to Rick for me on my behalf. And then I reached out to Rick DeFore. I drove my butt all the way to Lincolnshire, Illinois. And Rick DeFore at the time, who we already know was super busy with the PLC work going on, took 45 minutes with a 23-year-old young man who wanted to be a principal. And I've never forgotten that. And then years later, to be able to go to Minneapolis to a PLC conference and watch Rick on the stage for quite frankly, the very last time. And for him to navigate that keynote, knowing that it would be his last keynote ever because of his health issues, is still something I've never forgotten. It's just, it's amazing, right? To remember those types of people who have helped us in the organization. So again, people, no one is where they're at without the help of other people. And so continue to provide support for other people. Joe and I are here today because people helped us get here. And my guess is you're where you're at because people helped you get there. So God bless all of you for the work you continue to do and support one another. And thank you for the work that you do. And thank you for connecting with us and helping Joe and I be better. And Joe, thank you for asking the question this morning. I love you, my brother. God bless everyone. Have a great weekend and go Hawks.
Take care, everybody. Go Crickets.
All right, go Crickets.